that it stands for. Eitz Chaim He. It is a tree of life. We are making an analogy between the document at the core of Jewish civilization, Torah, and Sophia, wisdom, which is what it stands for and is there to bring us, with a biological organism, right? With a class. I think it's neither phylum nor order, right? Trees, I think, are class, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? But the point is, like, there's a lot of trees out there, and some of them really look like trees and others don't, and some things that look like trees aren't technically, and right, et cetera. Some things that are really low to the ground are, but the point is, they tend to be the taller things in an ecosystem, right? Those majestic beings that more than any other literally root the ecosystem and keep it in place and help define what it will be like. So, what's the analogy of Torah and tree? Go.
Roots us.
Root as a metaphor.
Branches.
Branches as a metaphor,
Fruit.
right? We need roots and we need wings, right? We sink our roots into that which is fixed and ancient and holy, and we spread our branches into the ever-changing breeze. And it's the same organism, and we need the roots and the branches to be in continual dialogue. So we remain rooted while we wave with the wind.
Fruit.
Fruit. Tell me more about fruit. It does.
It plants seeds. The fruit has the seeds.
So the fruit nourishes us.
And
The fruit nourishes the future ecosystem through replication
and other animals.
and other animals. Because after all, what is an acorn?
Future tree.
Right. Actually, it's a fruit,
It's a fruit.
right? Fruit doesn't mean it's juicy and edible for humans. Fruit means that it is something that some species out there will find desirable and will want to nibble on and may store it away. So when squirrels take their acorns in the winter and go bury them all over, the ones they forget about, right, the vast majority of the time, or they die because squirrels don't live that many winters, right? Those become future acorns. Future oak trees. What an incredible strategy, because they can take that acorn blocks and blocks away, right? What a great seed dispersal mechanism. That's what fruits are. But they nourish us, and we are only one of many species that is nourished by the fruit of the trees.
I'm not sure exactly how to put it, but trees take carbon dioxide. It's photosynthesis. Bible does the same kind of a thing.
Nice. So there's two separate things. Photosynthesis. Those of you who were here Thanksgiving weekend heard this already, that all the stuff in Judaism about gratitude and how gratitude is actually for the daily miracles. Photosynthesis is daily miracle number one, right? There somehow nature, evolution, God figured out a way for the most common building blocks out there of light and water and carbon-based soil with some nitrogen to actually create something that then is the basis of the entire ecosystem, right? We, even those of us who eat meat, are still dependent on photosynthesis at every stage of the process. So if photosynthesis, with trees as the best exemplar, right, is the root of human life, then that's a great analogy for Torah as root, the central animating factor in our spiritual life. So photosynthesis is an analogy. But Norman reminds us it's also about breathing, right? Biologists and spiritual people. Rabbi Arthur Waskow is famous in the Jewish world for doing this, but it's really just bringing biology into Judaism, it's interbreathing. We breathe out, the trees breathe in, and vice versa, right? And so we are literally exchanging breath with all the greenery that's out there. And that includes the field grasses, but because trees have the height and width advantage, they're a bigger factor. So mostly we're breathing tree air, purified of too much carbon dioxide, because that gets sequestered in the trunk and the branches and the roots as it grows. And in a healthy, mature ecosystem, it will slowly decompose and slowly return that carbon to the soil and to the organisms that need it. Right? Separate issue is when we put too much carbon into the air, the trees can't breathe it all, the oceans can't absorb it all, and that's where we're seeing the famous Keating curve of atmospheric carbon dioxide rising by 3 parts per million, now closer to 4 parts per million per annum. And for the record, at the height of the ice ages, the number was 180. And at the dawn of industrialization, it was 280. And we're already at 420. And it's rising 4 per year. That's another 100 in just a quarter century. That's one generation. The world cannot sustain that. That is the scientific consensus. So of course, America is all in to the Paris Treaty. Oh, sure.
Oh, wait.
Okay, yeah. So it's quite a week to be talking about this, but you know, even conservative, politically conservative scientists, right? This is the absolute overwhelming consensus, and even industry-funded stuff has moved away from denying climate change and is increasingly moving away from anthropogenic climate change. Because for a while they were saying, yes, it's changing, but it's natural variability. It is not. And again, clear, overwhelming global scientific consensus of all the experts on this. More than 97% unanimity on the basics of this. And they're now just saying, yeah, but that's the cost of doing business. But what is the impact on our great-grandchildren of the cost of doing business?
Unless you don't care.
Unless you don't care. So these are the kinds of questions we need to be asking. And this is why Judaism and environmentalism are, to my mind, synonyms, right? And that's easy for me to say. I came of age in the 80s and 90s, and this was my big issue. And you know, I've been in lay leadership and professional on this. Like, you know, if I have a name outside of Easton and Bethesda, it's, you know, as an eco-Jewish teacher. So obviously a passion, but my goal more than anything is to help Jews see Judaism and an ecological orientation as synonymous enough that we move with one identity, and our Jewish selves get involved with protecting the bay, protecting the earth. And our secular selves that care about those issues also go to shul, right? That's my dream. So thank you all, because my dream is being real here with these tables. And no one yet, but if you see the recording, you too.
Hear that British.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so interbreathing. That was all a departure from that idea of we share the breath and the carbon. Amazing stuff. Any other?
Well, Rabbi, you just underscored what we know is the case, and that is the interrelatedness of all creation.
Right.
That we ought to be guardians of the garden.
Right.
That
So,
was our command.
ooh, very nice. And in a minute, when we turn to the texts, we will actually do that. And if you see this online before June, while I still have the address, rabbifred@tbieaston.org, I'll send you a copy of this. Right, so, all right,
Rabbi, so there's a book I heard of, an author, and I don't know it, but I think it had to do with this, that, it oversimplifies, but there's too much fire. I think it was a British author. He went on, it was an essay or something, that everything is fire. Try to reduce the amount of fire. Take energy from, the sun, from the earth, bar as you've done, as we've done. Take, don't do things that burn. You drive an electric car, and it's driven from solar energy. It's not burning. You're not burning. You have an electric car and you plug it into the grid. The grid is very likely burning coal in the state or gas. So if you kind of use that as a preset, what is burning? Is there a way to reduce the amount of fire to nothing?
nice, right.
It is.
Right. I mean, we celebrate Prometheus because fire enabled civilization,
Of course.
right? And in small quantities, it's amazing, and too much of it is literally killing us. And that's the second Rubicon we need to cross. We crossed into the coal age, the steam age, the oil age, and we advanced because of all that. And life expectancy is greater, and we get to visit our grandchildren who get to have global adventures, and right, I mean, there's all kinds of good that comes with that, and that times 8 billion is way beyond the carrying capacity of Earth, beyond the ability of all the ocean and all the trees to sequester that much carbon. And we need to rethink the basics. So I love that oversimplification that is also a deep truth, less fire, right? For the source of our energy. Nice. So back again, trees and Torah, there's habitat and microclimate. You know that the trees actually create the weather, right? They're influenced by the weather, particularly the western edge of a forest, but the eastern edge of a forest, given prevailing winds, is actually much more moist because the forest changes the atmosphere, the microclimate it's called, or biome. And so we have that. We also have avoiding erosion, right? The roots are not just a spiritual metaphor like Torah, but they literally prevent the ground from washing away. They build up the soil, and they keep the waterways clean as a result, right? And prevent algal blooms in the bay, right? When too much nutrient load goes in it from our well-intentioned fertilizers and stuff, right? But also just the natural cycle. You want clean water, and ultimately you want healthy soil. You need roots to anchor the soil. And of course, habitat, right? For us and for everyone else. To say nothing of buildings, construction, paper, toilet paper, right? I mean, we use trees for a lot of things. Firewood, right? Too much dependence on firewood is going to create a lot of smoke and is going to return the carbon way faster than it should. But once in a while, maybe with marshmallows and a guitar, we call that a midurah, right? The Jewish campfire. That's good stuff. Okay, so trees are all of that and more. Torah is all of that and more. And that core analogy of Torah as a tree of life, wisdom as the tree, is the beginning of a whole lot. Anyone know in Judaism where God is a tree? It's sometimes called the tree of life because it's the tree of creation, effectively, right? Anyone know in Jewish theology, what phase of Jewish theology envisions God as a tree?
Burning bush.
Burning bush.
Ooh, very nice. So God emerges from the burning bush, which may or may not have been a tree, but right. And excellent. I
That's
wasn't
why I
thinking
didn't
that.
say
I
that.
like it, right? I'm actually going medieval on you. This is Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism,
Oh, yes.
that pictures 10, sometimes
Yeah.
11 circles of divine emanation or spheres, and they are arranged like a tree, right? And those are called sephirot. So in the English academic literature, it's got the unfortunate name of the sephirotic tree, right? But it's envisioned as this is God's unfolding from Keter, crown, at the very topmost leaves, the newest and most verdant, right? All the way down to where the tree meets the earth. And 1 through 10, it's a tree. And that is God. God energy, God characteristics are envisioned in medieval Jewish theology as a tree. So tree is Torah, tree is wisdom, tree is God. And by the way, when you have a scroll of Torah, right, it's usually wood, the 2 spindles on either side, and we call them the eitzim, the woods. Pick up the woods, right? And so we're literally touching physical tree when we lift and wrap the Torah. So many layers of that analogy.
Yes, you look at door by door, all sorts of generational tree.
Lador Vador, intergenerational, the family tree.
Yeah.
Our family story is also a tree. Right on. There you go. See, anyway, we could keep going, but that's just to ground us in one metaphor, to remind us of the many ways in which Judaism and eco-consciousness are interrooted, interbreathing, and in many ways interdependent and interchangeable. All right, so the handout here is a version, so I'm in my mid-50s now. When I was 20, I took a year off from undergrad and walked across the United States with an eco education group. It was 1990. And we were just turning from like campus progressive energy being anti-apartheid and anti-nuclear to being pro-conservation, right? It's good to be pro something, but it actually arose in many ways from the anti-nuclear of like, we're working really hard toward disarmament, which is something we can't really move the needle on much, right? Because that's like the Politburo and the military-industrial complex, and we're just college students. But pollution and radioactive pollution, which is a byproduct of the nuclear stuff, is actually a clear and present danger, and it is scalable. Like, I can personally prevent a little bit of it. And as I educate more people, I can do more. So this became about agency, right? And so anyway, the point is, ever since college, I've been like a Jewish environmental educator. I was on the National Hillel board that year. So it became like a cross-country speaking tour for me. I've spoken lots of different congregations and Jewish summer camps and that sort of a thing. And I never looked back. So I went to rabbinic school, and every paper I wrote about Jewish thought and literature in different ages was kind of, what are the proto-ecological consciousness that's embedded in this stratum of the collective Jewish experience? And I had 4 amazing years of doing that. And then I landed in a pulpit, and all my volunteer leadership, my number one hobby was doing multi-faith and Jewish environmental organizing and activism. Okay, so this is like core for me. The sheet you have in front of you is a version of what I first put together in 1990 when I was 20. And it was like cut and pasted a Xerox machine with Scotch tape, right? Now, it's amazing. Anyway, it keeps getting updated, but the basic idea holds. So there's 4 things that are significant here. If time runs out, just going to walk you through them. One is the categories, the big print on the left, of 5 or 6 main areas of kind of Jewish environmental thought. Then the texts themselves, classic Jewish text, and in a few cases modern, that build the case as pithily as possible. And on the right, concrete actions that we can take that make a difference, that help us live out Torah. Because after all, Torah is translatable as law and instruction, but it's also blueprint for Jewish practice. So it is study and action rolled into one when we talk Torah. So the tree of life as Torah is both we need to learn about nature and we need to act to protect it and to be at one with it. So that's where the actions become so important. And then at the bottom on the back page, resources, websites, organizations, lots of good work being done in the Jewish world and in the multi-faith world and in the secular world. Okay, so we're going to walk quickly through some of these texts with whatever time we have after whatever discussion we're going to have now. So who is storing up a question, a doubt, an amplification, an argument? Go.
Well, this is kind of peripheral, but
Yeah.
I think that we ought to do an interfaith program here on the environment. And we may have a little weekend swap to do, and that might be a way that we can. Are you on board?
Am I on board?
Let's do it.
Cool.
What is interfaith?
That means that we'll have some other clergy leaders, we might have some ministers, we might have, in addition to having a rabbi here, and it'll be open to congregants in different communities. And maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about our religious roots and how they relate to the environment.
Barbara and Len took me to the farmer's market early one Shabbat, and I struck up a conversation with a local organic person. Turns out we have all the mutual friends because she also is involved with IPLDMV.org. IPL, Interfaith Power and Light of DMV, District, Maryland, and Virginia, Northern Virginia. Long story, there's also a Virginia IPL. I'm the past chair of IPL DMV as a lay leader, and then I moved to the national board of the network. More long story. The point is, there's a statewide Maryland and also DC and Virginia organization that brings together all the locals, because sometimes you need to work with the city of Easton and the mayor's office, and sometimes you need to work with Talbot County and the county level, right? And sometimes you need to work on an ecoregion basis, which could either be the Delmarva or could be the Bay, right? And we are both, right? But actually the realities here are very different from Prince George's or Montgomery, right? To say nothing of Allegheny County or something, right? So Maryland's a big state for a small state with an amazing level of ecoregions. It's like Israel, right? You've got the high and the low, the mountains and the sea, the wet and the dry. And there's a lot there to protect, and there's a lot of different groups to organize. And in many of those places, but not yet on the shore, there are regional organizers who are doing this work actually through the churches and the mosques and the synagogues. Because sometimes you need to hear from the Union of Reform Judaism taking a stance on ecology, and they do. The Religious Action Center is all over this. It's beautiful, right? Sometimes you need a broader Jewish frame, like what does the Torah say? But if you actually want a rebate on doing a home energy audit to figure out where your reasonably new construction can still be a little tighter of an envelope and save more energy, right? Then you need to know who are the local contractors. And odds are good that someone who belongs to a local church has that tip for you, right? So there's so much that we can do at the local and the regional level not just the state and the national. And that's that's a long answer to what is interfaith. Okay.
We actually had, in the last 6 or 7 years, an IPO person come talk to us.
We had somebody come, we had those things we put on our light
Yeah,
switches,
Yeah.
Was that the?
as an example.
Yeah.
I have already told the director, who's a nice Jewish girl from Baltimore, Joelle Novi, like a powerhouse.
Yeah, she grew up in my congregation.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
my kids.
Yeah, and Joelle is a friend. I actually hired her. I was the chair way back when, and she's now one of the leaders in this national effort. She had the idea of those light plates. And when I showed up here in November, literally the night that we were hosting 150 people and 3 Chesapeake Bay scientists for Shore Rivers, program that Ron Rothman helped organize as a dual board member of Shore Rivers and B'nai Israel, which is just what I'm saying, the interchangeability of the two, right? And I walk in to Rabbi Peter's study that's going to be mine for a few months, and the light switch is there. Then my friend Joel, right? Anyway, it was a beautiful. It was like homecoming. So I never
Can you
been.
describe the lights and what am I?
Tell us about the.
We're going to take a tour of the rabbi's study. It's a mess, don't worry about it, but there's one still there. The funny thing is, we've done better by having motion sensitive, right? We need to change the settings because they stay on for like an hour afterwards, but like they're going to go off eventually, right? Which is a really great thing. But we need the reminder. So the reminder is there's a Jewish one specifically that says Bal Tashchit. Deuteronomy 20:19, you shall not waste. Turn the light off when you leave the
So
room,
it's a message.
right?
It's a message.
And I have one in Arabic, and I have one in Spanish, and right, like it's beautiful, right? This model, and then the basic English one. Yeah, it's just a reminder, but it's branded with the interfaith power and light thing, so that when I am reminded to turn off the light, I'm also reminded of my faith. And a number of you have or had them in your homes because of that program. And I can arrange more if you're interested. All right. Okay, more questions, thoughts, arguments.
Quick question. We're like kind of close to Tu B'Shvat, the New Year for trees, like to arrange any type of interfaith event. But I was thinking that would be a cool thing to kind of like be like, oh, here we're in a Jewish space, but like everyone's welcome and trees and yada yada. Then I was like, I mean, Judaism's always like telling us to think about the trees and think about the environment. Like it is like seasonal that Judaism's like, please remember this actually. And I was just thinking that's cool. And if anyone's doing a Tu B'Shvat Seder, that'd be very cool.
Nice. Anyone know where we are in the moon cycle? Right now?
It's about a quarter.
You were getting the
Wait.
message.
Which quarter?
It's about a quarter, isn't it?
Wait,
Waning.
Wait,
It's a
We're
waiting
on the way
crescent.
down.
Waiting
These
crescent.
guys are
Right.
beautiful.
It is already waning crescent. We're well into the final quarter because we're only a few days away from Rosh Chodesh, right? Of Shvat. And the reason I know that is, without even looking at the calendar, is, as I said, 2 weeks from now is Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of Song, where we read Michamocha in the original Exodus 15, right? We're 2 weeks away from that, and Shabbat Shirah is always the Shabbat before Tu B'Shvat. Always. So it's music Shabbat and eco Shabbat rolled into one, and it will be a theme in the service 2 weeks from now. And then Tu B'Shvat is later that week, 2.5 weeks from now at the full moon, right? Because 2 stands for Tet Vav, which is 9 plus 6, which is really 10 plus 5,
15th day.
which is the way the math would work, except 10 plus 5 would be Yud He, which is God. And so we don't use it. But there's a beautiful essay by Dr. Ari Alon, a leading Israeli environmental thinker, called From Tu B'Shvat to Yah B'Shvat, of like, let's reclaim the Yah, the 10 plus 5, the divinity in the holiday, and not just the 9 plus 6, so that we don't accidentally say God's name. Anyway, we're too in the weeds there, but fun stuff. All right.
That's the question.
It's interesting to me that the centrality of nature is central to all religions. It's something we have in common, that base. So in a time in which we're very separated, it gives a a common base for interfaith work.
So true. There's amazing academic work being done. Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm at Yale used to be with Harvard and did a series of conferences 25 years ago, out of which came a series of books, Judaism and the Environment, Christianity and the Environment, Shintoism and the Environment, right? Like all these great faiths, and right, whether you're going to the Vedas and the Gitas, or to the Holy Quran, or to the New Testament, or to the Hebrew Bible, or right? Yeah, we are all on the same page. That's the beauty of the Interfaith Power and Light model. Its parent 501c3 is the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington, that has as its famous motto like 11 different circles around a big circle, and each one is like a cross and a crescent and a Jewish star and a right, because we are all in it together, like the coexist bumper sticker with the right, all anyway, yeah. So amen. And sometimes we need to focus on the power and light in the sense of energy, right? Like the movement is named like a utility on purpose to remind us burn less, but sometimes we need to underline the interfaith part, because this is also part of democracy. This is the American model, is that we don't stratify by religion, that we look out for each other and we create a pluralistic society. And the health of vibrant democracy in many ways depends on that. And I'm not saying anything more before I get in trouble. Okay, yeah.
I like these very small but large suggestions on the actions, because I think they make it easy or easier to do things that really make a difference. And for example, we haven't been using toilet paper, we use bamboo, easy to buy, easy to, I mean, there's no difference that you can tell, but why kill a tree for toilet paper? Bamboo grows very rapidly and replaces itself. I mean, it's an action that you could put in there, but I like these doable shots,
Right.
so to speak.
So it's a life orientation, and these are actually very reductionist to like a handful of tachlis, as we say, practical brass tacks things you can do that are just examples of an orientation that is 100 decisions, little micro things a day, right? But yeah, we could do an entire shiur on toilet paper, right? Right, and which ones to look for, because Forest Stewardship Council, you can get really, really cheap at Aldi, and that's a good certification that we know those forests were responsibly managed, as opposed to your name brand Charmin, which could be coming from cloud forests in Costa Rica, to say nothing of bidet option, right?
That's the best eco.
To say, right, and bamboo, right? Anyway, and so it all connects. Yeah.
Can we put a tip in our weekly announcements?
Can we?
We'd really like to.
All right, we're talking this week. Cool. Awesome. Other thoughts?
Just reminded Ellen's thoughts about bamboo. So there's we tried, to get rid of all fire and all product from the house. We built it. We failed. We take energy from the grid, we return it energy to the grid. But the first year the balance was great. After that, it fell back. I'm not sure why. We got sloppy, the habits. Sorry to kind of bring it back to this, but so to speak. There is technology that gets rid of sewage altogether. I've seen it in Chesapeake Bay Foundation's system. There's a model house in Accokeek. We visited before we built ours. A lot of the philosophies in our house are taken from this Accokeek house 6 years ago, where they also simply take the sewage and it's basically in a tank fed by bugs, and after a certain period of time, 6 months, it's clean soil.
Right, it's
You know,
it's
you can
called
grow
compost,
trees.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And you can compost human waste if you know what you're doing. Now, I mean, you don't want to put it in a mixed compost pile with your newspaper and lettuce, but this is, it's an ancient technology that we're now bringing to modern scale. So, sorry, you keep going, then Norman's gonna complexify it, yeah.
Okay, no, I just wanna throw out that there's tech. So I tend to approach these things like an engineer as opposed to a philosopher, which I've always done that. I digress for a second, you mentioned a couple of times the Paris agreements, the fact that Trump has pulled out of it. I mean, I think it's reprehensible. But the fact is, the US has met its goals constantly, more so than most other countries, because of the switch that we are making from burning coal in old inefficient power plants, enormous amount of heat flame, to natural gas and combined cycle turbines where they capture the waste heat, produce even more. So we're from 25%, 30% efficient power plant burning coal to a 65% power plant burning natural gas, which itself produces half the carbon that coal does, kind of, unit for unit. So we've been meeting these goals by switching one fuel for another, which I've been advocating. At some point, we're going to run out of coal, to substitute for it.
Right.
And we haven't yet.
Right, and we're also gonna run out of natural gas, and we're still burning carbon, and natural gas is methane. And any methane that doesn't get burned because it's leaks, which is, we're realizing an increasing slice of the pie, is 80 times more potent than CO2. So
Don't really lose that.
the newer studies are now questioning just how much of a net benefit the transition to natural gas is in a cradle to grave analysis. That said, we got some really great protections for methane, forcing industry to not leak, and they're on the regulation hit list.
If they don't leak, they get to itself.
Under the new administration. So all of this comes back to the real world, but it's also philosophical, and it's also engineering, and it's also politics. Joyce and then Norman.
Oh, Norman, you go, you were waiting.
Oh,
What, that engineer goes first.
well, you say composting is an ancient tradition brought into modern times. The problem is when it comes into modern times, it's coming in with different stuff. How many of you have heard about forever chemicals?
Yes.
And forever chemicals, they're finding now that was used in compost, the compost is now a way of concentrating the forever chemicals that we're putting into the ground for fertilizer. So it may be an old solution, but it's got new hazards with
Can
it.
you be more specific so that we know what, for those of us who.
Well, what they're finding now is that all these sludge wastes that was redirected to use for fertilizer. I'm not talking about fertilizer
Industrial
in
or
your garden.
residential?
I'm talking about, mass fertilization.
I was talking about taking the manure and putting it on.
Oh, I'm talking about taking all of our garden vegetable peel.
No, I'm talking about
That's
big,
cool.
big stuff.
Okay.
Big stuff. But that stuff is it's picking up through the natural systems that we have. PFOAs, or forever chemicals, that don't break down. And the body doesn't break down, it's building up in the body actually. And one of the ways that it's building up faster than in the past is from sucking it up from the ground. You need a purge stream, you need to get rid of that somehow, right? We haven't figured out how to do that yet. So
the PFAS category that Norman is talking about is really bad, and it's fire retardant, and it's non-stan,
Oh, yeah.
and other things that we routinely use, an ounce here, a pound there, and they've become integrated in modern life, but they don't go away, and they are presumably and increasingly being proven carcinogenic.
And that's what I call it forever, because they don't go away.
And they bioaccumulate, right? Because fatty tissues absorb them, and that includes the salmon, right? that eat the anchovies, that eat the, right, et cetera, and we, and, right, okay. But the ultimate forever chemical is plastic, which we use willy-nilly. So one thing, board members, right, is as simple as, like, the next time that we buy disposable things, no plastic.
Did you notice?
Compostable,
we
et cetera.
switched to paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you know, we all still have old storehouses of things to use, and once in a while, you're in a pinch, okay, right? I'm famous for either bringing my own stuff, or if I can't, I take with me. And I have so many forks already from B'nai Israel because I forget to bring one, but I'm not gonna just throw it away when I'm done, right? It only had my vegetarian
Right.
stuff on it. I can rinse it off and use it at least one more time, maybe 10 more times, right? So the whole ethic of disposability is what I'm here to teach by bringing the Torah angle, right? Moving to an entirely different consciousness, which is spiritual and ecological together. And that is cycle, right? Life cycle, year cycle, water cycle, Krebs cycle, waste cycle, waste not, want not, zero waste, etc. Right? Okay, so that's the lesson. And that said, it gets complicated because of things like bioaccumulation and the ubiquity of plastics, etc. Joyce.
This is away from the sustainability issue first.
Please.
Louder, please.
Rabbi Fred was talking about sustainability and, also about a lot of toxic chemicals, which I spent most of my career looking at. But what I feel most out of control about right now are the fires and what they contribute to climate change and what they're contributing to toxic air that people are breathing. And it was interesting. I talked to our son yesterday, and he said he hadn't talked to his sister last week. And how is she doing? I said, well, we're blessed in that her house is there. They left for a few days from LA, but she worries about the children being outside for sports and things like that. And, there's no good answers right now. So, Jonathan said to me, well, Mom, do you think it's worse than when I was in Beijing, when you visited me? What year was it when he had, no,
2000.
2000. When he was there, he was a little older. When he was married, he was 10.
2010.
2010, and he was very sick with pneumonia because the air was so terrible. And you could, if you were ever in China at that time, I mean, you could see the pollution. It's just god awful. And I said to him, that was probably mostly from coal burning in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it was from automobiles and industrial releases. But when you're talking about burning, not just fires that are burning up our trees, which is terrible, and all the brush, but 1,000 homes and cars and lithium batteries.
Yep.
And I don't even mention the word dioxin to my daughter because she'll go nuts. We worry about all the plastics that are burning, the VOCs and the heavy metals. That's why we have laws about incinerators in this country. So it's very scary because I don't know how you control that. We don't control when it's going to rain and when the winds are going to blow. I think somebody upstairs may be, but we're not doing it. And I feel like that is one of those very anxious moments of not feeling like we're out of control of where we're going.
So I realize we're not going to get to all these texts, but
I'm sorry, I took you
no.
off.
But when if we got to the second paragraph of the Shema, it's in the middle, just above the recycling Jewish star, right? Second one under whose earth is it anyway? This is the traditional second paragraph of the Shema that every conservative and every Orthodox and now every Reconstructionist Siddur includes, the Reform doesn't, right? We just go right to Lama Tiskaru, and in the process, we're leaving out a paragraph and a half. The paragraph that we're leaving out is this: if you really listen to my commandments, you really love God, you serve God with your heart and soul, right? Which is to say, you're living according to wisdom, according to the tree of life, right? With all of the rules that are there to reinforce ethics and spirituality. And if so, then justice and sustainability are going to be baked in, right? With kind of that if, right? If you do that, you will eat and you will be satisfied. And then it goes on to say, and you will have the rains in their season, the early rain and the later rain, Yoreh umalkosh. Our tradition, like every indigenous tradition, when you're really dependent, right, it's not just what's the annual precipitation, it's how much did you get in March and how much did you get in May? How much comes with one massive deluge and then how much is withheld with one long drought? California had an incredibly wet season 18 months ago. All this brush grew up. Then it had a record-setting drought. And then it had record-setting winds, all of which are predicted by the climate change models as getting more and more. Add to that what we used to call the human wildland interface is now everywhere, right? Certainly in California, the brush and the forest goes right up to the houses, and we know houses are better off and worth more, and better education and lower crime and everything else is correlated with tree cover, right? And that certainly makes a difference in places like Phoenix, where it's a life or death difference, and where the barrios don't have trees by and large, but the wealthier neighborhoods on the north side do. But even, I mean, DC or Baltimore, you can think about, right?
Right here in Easton.
And even here, right? So we are a greater risk because there are so many people spreading out and wanting to live right by the water, even though the water is going to rise, and right by the forest, even though the forest is going to burn, right? And that gets to questions of federal flood insurance and fire insurance and like what is in our power, even if it's a 50-year plan to reshape, right? They're calling it managed retreat. And maybe not in the next 50, but in the 50 after that, the entire eastern shore is going to be in a process of managed retreat. Because sea level rise is, the rate is rising. Forget the sea is rising, the rate of the rise is rising, right? So yeah, this is personal for all of us. And it's in, I mean, in LA, yes, absolutely. It's called PM 2.5 is the fancy, right, for particulate matter less than 2.5 microns across, which is the really small little bits of char and dust, et cetera, that actually evade the body's defenses and get to the deepest part of our lungs and do the most damage. And it is the soot that comes from the diesel exhaust in Delhi and Mumbai and Beijing and Nairobi and mega cities around the world, and still to some extent LA and New York and DC and Baltimore, right? But forest fires are exactly the same. It's a massive amount of PM 2.5. So when you do the air quality index, and there were those days when it was code red here because of fires in Canada, right? And so yes, these things, long time frames we need to bring to this, which if we got there, there's a whole intergenerational thing, right? Judaism's all lador vador from generation to generation. And that's what we need to be thinking about. We will not undo climate damage in our generation or our grandchildren's generation. In fact, we may not even see an improvement in the situation until our great or great grandchildren, because the carbon already emitted has a median 100-year lifespan. from one use, just driving to shul, even in an electric car, because the grid is still partly schmutz based, right? Right, one moment of doing what we think we have every right to do is putting pollution that lasts for 4 generations into the air. And as bad as that's gonna be for descendants of mostly affluent-ish, white upper middle class people with resources, think about Mumbai and think about Nairobi and right, Bangladesh, right? Like, wow. So every bit of Jewish teaching about love your neighbor as yourself kicks in here, and every bit of Jewish teaching about Lador Vador, generation to generation, kicks in here. And we're playing the long game. So we're kind of screwed for the next 4 years. And future generations will write the book and talk about how many species went extinct because of a 4-year backtrack. And how many people died from the increasing amplification in global weirding. It's not just global warming, it's all those unpredictable things, and all of the social and political instability that comes from it.
Yes.
Syria was a drought way beyond the record, right? That amplified the unrest that has finally taken maybe a positive turn for a change, right? But we'll see. But all of those 8 million or so refugees from Syria, they are at some level climate refugees. And we're having more and more of them. So good thing we have an open, robust immigration policy here, because our pollution is causing more and more people to need to migrate. Just saying. All right, anyway, sorry, we're gonna end on a happy note, I promise.
So to bring it, to go from global, from the macro to the micro. So I grew up in a place where there were blue laws. Today is Shabbat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I am not going to go into a store and purchase anything today. I loved the rhythm of the week. That having that day free to socialize, to pay attention, to be with one another. And that is what I myself.
Early reform was onto something when they said, let's do Shabbat on Sunday. Right? I mean, I love Shabbos. But Shabbos on Sunday made a certain amount of sense in a Christian majority society with blue laws by Arna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, for exactly that reason. And better yet is having a 2-day weekend, right?
So we have one for ourselves.
Thank you,
and one-
International Ladies Garment Union and David Dubinsky's mentor, also known as his grandpa. Just learned. So cool, right? So, right, but you know, the bumper sticker, thank you unions for giving us the weekend,
Yeah.
right? Well, right, that is just amplifying thank you Jews for giving the world the idea of Shabbat. That you routinely take time in a week out of the rat race of production and consumption and say there's something that matters more.
And give birth to social justice, that we're in this together.
Right. So stuff about Shabbat and sustainability is one of those sections here. And then so we bake that into the week. We also bake that into a lifespan with 7-year cycles and 50-year cycles. And sabbatical and jubilee are when you take it, you go from the micro of my own experience of I deserve to have at least 1 day, preferably 2 a week, when I set the agenda and not my corporate boss, right? But and then you rethink everything. If you stop commercial agriculture 1 year in 7, which is what sabbatical calls for, then you're just going to live close to the land. You're gonna know how to do everything. You're not gonna be so in a specialization of labor that the moment supply chains snap or something, we're all, going crazy. And you're not gonna get megacities and their pollution because we're gonna live small scale. Small is beautiful. E.F. Schumacher, right, was part of the 60s, 70s, early eco thought. Small is beautiful, gesundheit. Large has its advantages, but small is beautiful. And Judaism has that wisdom in it. And it's in the laws about Shemitah, sabbatical.
So, in terms of sustainability, there's one frightening fact that the rest of the world wants to be like the United States. Not too long ago, saying within the last 30, 40 years, there were advertisements in Sweden about washing machines, how wonderful they might be. They didn't have them. They got them now, but with washing machines. And with all of that comes the modern conveniences that we like and are used to. And one of the major sources of global warming is animals. And you can reduce global warming significantly by instead of feeding the beef, growing the vegetables. And use that as food for protein. So it's all this issue of people want to make a better life for themselves. And if that were to happen, the earth is not sustainable.
Enormous. Rule number 3. Take a look at the.
What is
right.
it?
Yeah, eat low on the food chain. Right.
Yeah, I didn't see that.
Yeah, already 20 years ago, one of my best friends, who's a fellow Jewish environmental educator, said, what it boils down to is the most American thing is the absolute worst thing you can do, and therefore the best thing you can do is not, which is drive your SUV to the steakhouse. Right. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Right? Drive small and sustainable, or don't drive, and eat low on the food chain are the two single biggest things that most Americans can do. And in our economic stratum, the third, which is probably the first, is fly less. And that's a hard one for a lot of us, especially when we have family elsewhere, or we have strong connections with Israel, or we do important work in the world that sometimes feels like it, right? This stuff is never easy. And at the end of the day, this is not meant to instill guilt. There isn't an absolute right or wrong. All of this takes place within a values-based framework where sustainability needs to be, in the end, met. So if there is an overarching goal or value, it is sustainability, because if we get this wrong, everything else is for naught. But within that magic, what is sustainable, there's a lot of variability. And I'm not saying never fly, never drive, maybe never eat beef, right? But the level that we think of as American, and that we grew up with assuming was just our right, and then we may feel virtuous if we don't, as opposed to normal if we do, we need to change what is normal and what is American. So the rest of the world wants to be like us. We also need to fund them to leapfrog the most polluting stages that we had, right? There shouldn't be electricity in rural villages. Of course they deserve that. But where's it gonna come from? With Western help, it's gonna all be microgrid and solar and wind. And that's why we have global finance climate mechanisms, which are under the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC framework. Yeah.
I want to underscore your point about flying. Very few people realize how absolutely polluting, climate threatening aircraft, jet aircraft in particular. I've read studies, Economics Association, that you can take your SUV, your family and your SUV to Florida, and it's far less polluting than putting your family on the plane and flying. It's incredible.
Because of the gas, is it because of the fuel oil?
just uses so much more energy out of gas, the amount of gasoline that the plane uses far more than if you could just put the same number of people, in as few SUVs you could something.
And what about all the support services that get the people on the airplane?
Yep.
The
And
airports and.
the
restaurants.
production. Think about how much stuff gets extracted and smelted and moved around, and I mean, you're right, for an aircraft that only has a lifespan of 20 years or so, right? So just like in architecture or in cars, they say about a third of the life cycle impact of an auto is in its production and disposal, right? So if you have an old clunker and you don't drive very much, keep the clunker. Right? Counterintuitive, but that is actually a better thing to do than rush out and buy a nice new shiny
Yes.
EV, right? So anyway, this stuff is complicated. And as I like to say, Kermit the Frog had it right and must have had a pintala yid in his neshama. Because he's saying it ain't easy being green. Right? And the parallel to it ain't easy being green is the Yiddish proverb, zu schwer sein a Yid. It's tough to be a Jew. Right? Now that expression is born partly out of a Jewish history of challenge and victimization, but it's also because whether you're doing it on the green side or the Jewish side, or my main thesis, which is that the two are essentially the same, you're supposed to drive yourself crazy, constantly thinking about the impact of every little thing, right? And that is not easy.
That's this in a nutshell.
The path of American convenience and comfort, if that's what we mean that the rest of the world's going to get to, we are all screwed. And our great-great-grandchildren are going to inherit a very constrained world, if one at all, right? But there's also an American story of innovation and of doing the right thing once we've exhausted all the alternatives, right? And so there's a whole lot here that we can get right. And even in years the federal government is getting it wrong, there's a whole lot of things here that we can get right. So this is, to me, halakha, right? Which literally means the way, the walking. This is how we proceed, right? And not in the classical halakha sense of Jewish law of clear black and white do and don't, but rather of shoulds and shouldn'ts, of mostly yes and occasionally, of a little bit of this value, but a lot of that value. And if we don't put a lot on the justice and sustainability side of the ledger, we're in trouble. But we have a tradition that tells us to do exactly that. And that's the classic text near the end of the Torah, Deuteronomy 30:19, in the Reform tradition, that's the Yom Kippur morning best attended Torah reading of the year, right? I have set before you this day life and death, blessing and curse. You have free will. Uvacharta b'chayim. You better choose life. Lama'an tichya ata v'zarecha. You choose life so that you and your descendants may live. That's eco-Judaism. There's a whole lot more. Read it, talk to me about it. Popular demand, I'll happily do, more of this. I've got one just on climate change, one just on biodiversity, one just on takings legislation. Rubber meets the road in a whole lot of ways, but these are the core values that hopefully animate everything we do as people and as citizens and as Jews. Good job.
Good job.